be here with you.
I'm so glad you could come.
Thank you very much for having us. It's a huge privilege to be here in the Queen's Gallery, taking in all of this magnificent art all around us. And this is the exhibition that you curated. So perhaps you could just tell me a little bit about how the exhibition came into being.
So the Royal Collection includes one of the most significant groups of works of art by Hans Holbein, and we wanted to celebrate that by putting the best of them, the most interesting of them, on display and examining Holbein, his work, his working practice, and really celebrating him as an artist.
Well, you've certainly done that. The exhibition is extremely impressive, and I'd love to know, how long did it actually take to prepare this exhibition?
It took about 3 years. Exhibitions take that amount of time, which seems like a long time when you start, but never feels like enough time. There's always more that you want to think about. You keep learning as you go along, but yeah, about 3 years.
That's incredible. So huge amount of work, and you also wrote the catalogue as well. Huge congratulations. We've got that, and it is wonderful, and something that I'm sure everybody who visits the exhibition will want to pick up a copy of. Can you tell us a little bit about Holbein himself?
Yes, Holbein is one of the great artists of the 16th century, which I think you can see if you look at the walls around you. He's a German artist. He's born in Augsburg. He's from a family of artists, so art is really in his blood. And he travels at first to Switzerland with his older brother, and they set up their own independent sort of workshop there. They joined the Painters Guild. He's really making his name in Basel, but then in 1526 he comes to England, and there are a number of reasons for that. One of them is the Reformation. So iconoclasm means that there is or there's less work on the continent for artists. There are less commissions for panel paintings, but also we know that Holbein was ambitious. We know he'd already tried to make his way at the French court. He seems to want a court appointment, and England is a welcoming place for him to come. So he comes in 1526, and the rest is history. He makes his name. He becomes the king's painter. He creates that iconic image of Henry VIII, and he clearly just has this wonderful success based on that talent, his brilliant ability as an artist.
Absolutely amazing. And you mentioned that portrait of Henry VIII, but I'm wondering, do you have a particular favourite in the collection?
Oh goodness, yes. I think my favourite is someone who's not a household name. He's a man called Sir Thomas Lestrange.
Oh, okay.
Who lived at Hunstanton Hall on the North Norfolk coast, and who kept the most wonderful set of accounts with his wife. So we know an awful lot about the life at Hunstanton Hall at the time at which Holbein was working and was painting Sir Thomas. So we know that they had jugglers and trumpeters, and we know that the Boleyn family and the Shelton family came to visit them, and all these social interactions which give us a context for Holbein's work. But it's also my favourite because it is the most beautiful portrait. It's just this incredible use of black chalk. If you look at it, you can see how Holbein has left a white section in Sir Thomas's hair to show his hair shining. You can see how he's smudged and moved the chalk around just to create this sense of texture. And also because Sir Thomas looks like the nicest, most fun person. You can imagine him in the hall at Hunstanton with the jugglers and the trumpeters having people to dinner. So for me, that portrait is so evocative of Holbein's world as well as Sir Thomas's world. And it just tells us so much.
Well, you've just painted a very glorious picture there, so thank you very much for that. Now, not all of the portraits in the exhibition here are actually by Holbein. Case in point, the examples behind us. So can you just tell us a bit about why you decided to include these examples as well?
Absolutely. We include a group of works which were in the collections of Henry VII and Henry VIII, but aren't by Holbein. And those are at the start of the exhibition to show the sort of patronage that the Tudor Court was interested in, almost the sort of world that Holbein walked into. So you can, in that section, find Flemish paintings, Spanish paintings, probably brought by Catherine of Aragon, portraits of her parents, which is just incredible. You can see Italian sculpture, you can see French miniatures, so you get this wonderful sense of the Tudor Court as a really vibrant cultural, sort of place where art is really flourishing. And at the end, you pointed to this wonderful painting behind us, that the exhibition closes with a section that looks at Holbein's influence after his death in 1543, and the way that his paintings and his drawings influenced later court artists and the presentation of royal figures in portraiture.
Yeah, And so that's really interesting, and something that I wanted to ask you about, if you had a thought on this, because I've just written about young Elizabeth I, which is very exciting, and it struck me, it never really occurred to me hugely before, but when I was wandering around the exhibition and I was looking at the fact that Holbein sketched Edward VI, he sketched Mary I, but there isn't anything of Elizabeth, and I just wondered if you had any thoughts on why that might be, or not.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, there's sort of a gap on the wall over there, isn't there? We've got Edward and Mary, we haven't got Elizabeth by Holbein. I think we have to be careful with the question of survival. So we know that quite a number of Holbein's drawings didn't survive. Not all of the drawings, very few of the drawings you see on the wall around you have paintings. So it might just be that those drawings and paintings don't survive. So I don't think it's possible to say that Holbein didn't paint Elizabeth.
Okay.
But then he may not have done it, a question of timing. You know, you just wonder where he was, where she was. We date the drawing of Mary entirely on the basis of when she's in favour at court, when she's not. So, you know, for both Elizabeth and Mary, it's a very difficult situation. They're not always in the centre of things, but it might be that Holbein, you know, painted or drew Elizabeth and it's lost, or it's still out there to be discovered.
It's very tantalising, isn't it?
One particular sketch, and that is the one labelled as Anne Boleyn. Firstly, do you think it's her?
I do, absolutely. Yes, the label on the wall, we've been very, very, you know, clear that I certainly think this is Anne Boleyn. But I think the exciting thing about it is a drawing which we can debate, and there are lots of different points of view. So we've put it on the wall to encourage people to say what they think, to debate it.
Amazing. Well, I'm completely in accord with you there. And you're so right, it's for some time this has been very much a debated question. Why do you think there has been such resistance to accept Cheek's label?
I think it's always good to test these things, and I think a lot of people have spent some time questioning, is this what we think Anne Boleyn looks like? The major hurdle is, of course, the colour of the hair. We know Anne Boleyn was brunette, and that hair is very fair, and I can see why the portrait's been questioned. And there's been so much debate over the years, and some people have been very certain it is, some people have been very certain that it isn't. So, but that colour of the hair, I think, has been a major sticking point.
Absolutely. And what have you sort of hypothesised about that hair colour?
Well, I think that Holbein drew it dark. I think the first thing that's really helpful is that she has brown eyes. If you look closely at the portrait, she's definitely got brown eyes, which gives us a good start to having brown hair. Holbein, and you can see if you look around the exhibition, he builds up his layers of hair, and he starts very light, and then he puts darker and darker colours over to create this incredible texture. And when we looked closely at the drawing, chalk sits on the surface of a sheet of paper, it doesn't soak in like ink, so you can rub it off quite easily. And areas of that drawing, and indeed a number of the drawings, are very rubbed. And what I think has happened is that those darker layers have disappeared from the top. And if you look right at her parting at the top of her forehead, you can see many more, colours, black and red and that sort of thing.
Amazing. So essentially, over time, as these, sketches have been taken in and out of folders and such like, that darker chalk has been eroded, essentially.
Those drawings we know were in an album from certainly 1547 through to the early 18th century. We know that at one point, and someone says people turning the pages of the album has caused, the drawings to be, eroded, essentially, rubbed. So that action of turning the pages up to the 1720s, 1730s will have taken a little bit of the surface off. It's also a really interesting clue as to which drawings have been used more than others. If you look at the portrait of Jane Seymour, she's very rubbed. And that, I think, goes back to Holbein's studio. That's a drawing that's used again and again and again. So, in the act of making more and more paintings, they will have, that surface will have gone a little bit more. But I think that's what's happened with the hair.
Now, another sort of contentious area, I would say, about this sketch is that it has what appears to be the Wyatt arms on the reverse of the sketch. This is actually quite unusual for a Holbein sketch, though, isn't it, to have detail on the reverse?
For the works in the Royal Collection, it's unique. This is the only portrait drawing by Holbein in the Royal Collection, and remember the Royal Collection includes the majority of those portrait sketches from the English period. This is the only one with anything on the back. It's definitely the Wyatt arms, but I think it doesn't mean the sitter is a Wyatt. And I think it just means that this drawing became scrap paper, which to me suggests more than anything it's the Queen who was executed in 1536.
Absolutely. I've been doing quite a lot of research at the moment about sort of the survival of Anne Boleyn, and there has actually quite recently been this idea that there was a wholesale destruction of particularly her image, but also other items, whereas actually when you dig a little deeper, you can see, for example, in Henry's inventory that a vast amount of items relating to Anne Boleyn survive. So it's not contrary to what we know that this sketch would have survived in the Royal Collection.
No, and we know an awful lot about the provenance of the drawings. They have a really rich history. So we know that they seem to have stayed together in Holbein's studio until his death in 1543. So that drawing would have been among a group of drawings, you know, as a piece of scrap paper, maybe even turned upside down. That might be another reason it's rubbed. So we know that they were together till 1543. They were then in an album at Whitehall Palace by 1547, but we've got no indication that that album was looked at. There are a number of people in the album who you can imagine Henry VIII might not have wanted to see, Thomas More being another one, William Warren maybe being another one. So I think this one, if there was any sense of destruction, this would have escaped it simply by being an artist's material rather than formally portrayed.
That's absolutely fascinating. So the other piece of artwork that I would like to talk to you about, which may have a connection to Anne, is Solomon and the Queen of Sheba.
Yeah.
Do we have any idea why this was created or who may have created it?
It's like so much with Holbein, a complete mystery. We think that it was created as a New Year's gift. One thing you can say about it for certain is it is Holbein working to the absolute limit of his abilities as far as he can. And you can imagine him really trying to impress with this. Everything he does is impressive. Everything he does is exquisite, but this is incredible. It's this little limning, so it's a sort of manuscript miniature technique, and it's all in grisaille or grey essentially with this blue background. The only way we can date it is by comparison with things like the Coverdale Bible. It has been suggested that Thomas Cromwell or possibly Richard Rich were the donor, but we have no records, so we just can't tell.
Absolutely fascinating. I have to say, when I've seen this reproduced, I assumed it was a large piece, but the detail in it is absolutely incredible, isn't it? It really strikes me as being quite an intimate.
It is. It's like a miniature. It's meant to be something that you sort of look at in your cabinet and you pore over and you spot those details you've mentioned. This is a moment for me to encourage people to look at the website where you get this zoomable image so you can really zoom in on those details. But you're right, it is a really sort of incredibly personal thing. You can imagine owning it and just, it's that sense it's yours and it's beautiful. You're owning beauty by owning that.
It's amazing. It really shows, I mean, the sort of contrast piece, I think, would be sort of the Whitehall mural, that insanely huge masterpiece. But this is, on another scale, and has that intimacy to it, which really shows the breadth of his talent, doesn't it?
It does completely, and the thing worth saying is it is very convincingly read as an allegory of Henry and the church. Quite what the allegory is, but Solomon is so clearly a portrait of Henry, so although this is a biblical scene, it, like the Whitehall mural, it flatters Henry absolutely. So again, you can see how that would have worked as a New Year's gift, and we know that Richard Rich compared Henry to Solomon in a speech before Parliament, so there's a sort of background for it too.
So interesting, and I only wish that we could see the face of the Queen of Sheba, because it might give us more of an indication of when exactly it was created, if that allegory was sort of carried forward into the Queen as well. My last question to you is about a miniature that you have on display, which has formerly been called Catherine Howard, but there are questions now as to whether it could be another of Henry's queens. What's your opinion?
I think while I'm pretty confident that Anne Boleyn is Anne Boleyn, I'm not remotely confident about that miniature because we have nothing to hang it on. You'll see from the label we've said it's an unidentified lady, perhaps Catherine Howard, or traditionally identified as Catherine Howard. What we can say about her is she's probably royal because of what she's wearing. So she's wearing fabrics and furs which are restricted by sumptuary laws to royal sitters. She's always also wearing that jewel, which a number of people have pointed out is very similar, if not the same, to the one that Jane Seymour's wearing. So it's almost the royal jewellery box being passed on. But whether it's Catherine Howard, whether it's Anne of Cleves, is up for debate. The identification as Catherine Howard only goes back to the 18th century. It may record an earlier identification, we don't know. It is so much of Holbein is a mystery. You know, this incredible artist who records so much of Tudor England is himself so unrecorded. So, yeah, that one's another one for debate.
Do you know, there's a small part of me that likes the mystery.
Oh, definitely. Yes, it's much more fun. If it was all written down, there'd be no history to do.
Exactly. Well, thank you so very much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
No, I've really enjoyed it.